last minute glitches here, and right now we're just waiting for one here. Should be joining us shortly. But what I have decided to do is that I will be once a week. We'll do a coffee and a conversation. And thank you, Les. I appreciate it very much. Um, really excited to kind of get this live stream up and going here because, well, when it's just really cool to get it going. But I really want to do coffee and a conversation like once a week because this is, with so much going on in society today, it's very easy to get um, down and out. There's a lot of social unrest going on, and just, you know, everything's kind of up in the air. So, this is something that, I was inspired actually by Sean Stone with his show interviews. And it's where he goes and he interviews like one person every other week or whatever. And I mean, these are people that I haven't even heard of before. Um, I know he did one week, he had, let's see, um, Brad Martin, who is a Hollywood stuntman. I guess he did a documentary called Out of the Shadows, and that one was actually pretty interesting. But it just talks about like mainstream media, how a lot of times they use propaganda and whatnot. Um, so yeah, it's really really interesting. Um, Give me 2 minutes here. Let me see if I can see what's up here. Done. Oh, I believe that is him. Give me 1 second here. I'm gonna mute my mic and I will be right back, y'all. How are you doing?
Hmm. It's not my weekend actually. I'm in what is it today? It's Tuesday here in Australia. Monday, the States, I guess. So yeah, it was a good weekend though. You know, pretty chill. You know how to get him out. Just give no. Throw the seeds out here. He'll go. Throw the seeds outside. He'll go outside. He's got it. You got to throw the seeds out. Right. That's a bird. No. Oh, you mean a kid? Oh no, we don't have kids. Sure. Just there you go. Here, close the door again. I had it closed. Okay, the bird's left. All right.
Huh. There we go. Now they can hear. Now I've got audio on. Um, Still trying to figure all this stuff out. I'll tell you what, but all good. There we go. All right. Yeah. So you're in Australia right now, huh?
Yes, it's nice and open down here, and like no lockdowns or masks or anything like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Wow. I bet that's here.
no
We've still
COVID. I
got
haven't, I
the
haven't, I haven't thought about COVID in weeks, thankfully,
right.
except what I hear from the states. But I'm like, it's out of my head, out of my consciousness, out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. Exactly. I bet that's quite a relief. A bit
Hmm.
relaxing, huh?
Very
So
much.
I wanted to talk about your show interviews on Vocal. Um, Absolutely love it, by the way. But
Thank you.
if you would, for the viewers, just some of them I know who you are, some of them don't know who you are. So if you could just briefly introduce yourself.
You don't introduce me?
I did a little bit before you got here. That you were the host of Buzzsaw, and other than that, like I'm horrible at it. So
Okay. um, all right. So are we live or how does
we
this
are
work?
live actually right now.
Oh,
I've got a couple of people in my chat right now, and also I let them know that yeah, ask any questions. Um, what
we,
what inspired you to interview? Like, what inspired you to come up with that podcast and show?
yeah, sure. I mean, so you mentioned previously that I was the host of Buzzsaw. Um, and that Buzzsaw was a show from like 2013, 14, I think it started
Okay.
right after Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura
Yep.
that I co-hosted. And so because we dug into things relating to like time travel and the reptilian alien agenda and energy weapons and all kinds of like pretty cool advanced conspiracy stuff. Um, it felt like this Buzzsaw was like a natural spin-off from there. It was also a spin-off from my work as a filmmaker on Greystone Park, which was my film about breaking into these mental hospitals that were like haunted and abandoned in New Jersey and New York. So that was a true story that I developed into my first film. So basically, at that point of you know, by the mid 2010s, I was pretty deep into all the esoterica, from the occult history to conspiratorial politics to uh, spirituality, esoteric spirituality. I mean, you name it. It's like I kind of had an education in a lot of different things, both intellectually and empirically, physically.
Right.
So um, Buzzsaw stemmed from that, and then Buzzsaw was on the lip on YouTube. It went to Gaia for a few seasons on Gaia, and these were interviews. Obviously, I was doing with people, and then um, interviews for Vocal, which is now there's new podcasts going up every week on Vocal. Um, those interviews are again they're kind of like Buzzsaw. They're conversations with people that I find of interest. Whether it be most recently on our podcast we've had Mark Seifer, who's you might have seen him on the Tesla Files, like he's a Tesla expert. So we were talking about Nikola Tesla on that episode. We've had Freddie Silva, the esoteric historian. He's done great work on like the resurrection principle and in religion and spirituality. And we've had Josh Boone, the director of the new X-Men movie. I mean, a lot of cool guests. I'm just thinking the most recent three alone. But then interviews also it's like partly to do with the not just the time period. 2020 is a transformative year. Also, just my interest is more in the spiritual nature of life, you could say. Having covered a lot of the conspiratorial topics and a lot of let's say the hot topics across the 2010s, that people are now picking up on thanks to Q and the whole like QAnon thing. I think there's more of awareness about the conspiracy realm, but my interest has shifted from like physical conspiracies more to the spiritual nature of like what is reality, how does our consciousness create and affect reality, and a lot of this I guess stems from my documentary Metahuman I did with Deepak Chopra like 2 years ago. And once we delved into that place of like consciousness is everything, and literally it's all about our perception and our and how we can expand our awareness and our understanding as humans. That's I think where interviews, the shift from buzzsaw to interviews is very much predicated in that metahuman documentary with Deepak.
I'll definitely have to that one. But that sounds um second here. Sound keeps going in and out. All right, that's better. Okay, sorry about that. Um, okay. So, you mentioned, I know you did the one with Mark Seifer with you're talking about the Tesla and all of that, and
Yeah.
really, really cool. And then I know I actually originally kind of met you through Jeff Scoop because I had done
Yeah.
work with him and whatnot. So that had what had originally gotten me on to kind of learning about your show and a little bit more about you and whatnot because I stay out of the whole Hollywood loop thing. I'm just never been much of it. But it really, really interested me that you took a deeper look into things. You weren't, a lot of people typically see like Hollywood as very on the surface. Not many people seem to want to go a little bit deeper. And so, like I said, that was one of the things that interested me because you seem to want to go deeper. And for me, at least, like I look for things that inspire people, especially with all of the social unrest going on nowadays. And just, it's like we woke up in the twilight zone and it's opposite day. Like, so um, it's just it's really really cool to see that there are other people out there that want to take a deeper dive into everything. um One, what was it that I had? Sorry. Yeah, this is, I everything's pretty much just kind of laid back. I decided I was going to do coffee and a conversation like once a week,
Mm.
and I had contacted you and was like, hey, would you want to come on? And you're like, yeah, I'll come on Monday. I'm like, oh, okay, let's go. So so you're actually my very first coffee and a conversation, so I appreciate that.
Right.
Um, what inspires you?
What inspires me?
Yeah, now that
Good
could
question.
be what inspires you to the shows that you do, what inspires you as a human being. I know it's a very broad spectrum, uh, very broad question, but
It's interesting. I've never really grappled with that question until recently. In fact, ironically enough, because I feel like oftentimes what we're inspired by a sense of something we're missing, right? Something that's missing in life. That's it's ironically where a lot of inspiration comes from. In not in the negative sense, but desire, right? Like when when you're young and think about like when I was young and I was working out and wanting to work out and build my body. It was like I was inspired by the image of like, oh, musculature and what the male body can look like. And so there's a certain idea of what it can be. And I was looking at myself as a kid going, I don't have that, so I'm inspired by the idea of what it can be. So it's like ideals of something that we don't have or something that's missing. That's always been the inspiration in my work, whether it's my writing, whether it's the documentaries, the stories that I tell, the conversations that I have. It's always coming from a place of this is missing, whether it's in my life or in I look out at the world. I'm like, okay, someone's missing this point. They're missing this idea. They're missing this is not being talked about. Let's go there. Let's go into the places. Let's fill those places that are empty, you could say, or that are yeah, they're empty or they're unfilled or they're vacant, right?
right,
Go and fill it. And oftentimes, what's interesting about that is that uh, it's why a lot of my maybe a lot of my work is more like avant-garde or more for like a certain niche audience, because it's not like I'm not inspired to replicate or imitate that which is considered like mainstream or successful. I'm inspired by that which is missing.
Exactly.
And so it's just interesting how oftentimes that can be threatening to people or scary to people, because it's like, oh, they don't want to go there, they don't want to go into that dark space or that missing space, they want to keep it where it's safe and comfortable. And for me, I think I've always been not like, not to say like I'm always happy to go outside of my comfort zone, but I like to push the envelope and I like to push the discourse, and I find it interesting to go against the grain.
Right,
Just I
right.
find it more interesting.
Most people find it almost terrifying to go against the grain because
Yeah.
that means it's unpopular and they might get ridiculed, they might get teased, whatever. And that's interesting that you actually find inspiration in going against the grain. How far can we go? What else is out there? You're not afraid to question everything. Um, I had something and I just totally lost it. That's funny. Um, but yeah, I that's one thing I have noticed. Like, so many times we want to fit inside this little box because we're told that we have to fit inside this little box.
Mm-hmm.
And majority of us don't fit inside a little box, no matter what. We try, it just does not work. So it's very interesting to find that there are other, like I said, other people that's willing to go against the grain with all of that, and that's one of the things that inspires you. Um, Now, your dad obviously is Oliver Stone, and you can answer this if you want. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. How was it growing up and like with him doing movies and stuff like that?
Well, that's a big question.
And
Um, what,
like I
like
said, if you don't
more
want to answer it, you don't
specifically?
have to.
No, no, just like more specifically, what are you thinking? It's just like very
Um,
vague. I don't know.
it is very vague. Lots of my questions are very vague. Um, I would say, was it any different per se? For instance, I grew up in a small town out in the country, country girl. Like, I live in the city now, but so growing up was completely different. It was very low key, not a lot going on. Was yours because your dad was in Hollywood? Were you exposed to more of the Hollywood things, or would you say it was just kind of a balance?
Yeah, I mean, I did a. It's loud. I did a
It's okay.
documentary called. That's a really loud bike. I did a documentary called "Fight Against Time." Fight Against Time. Oliver Stone's Alexander. That was the making of his film Alexander back
Mm-hmm.
when I was 19. It's like on YouTube. I think people can watch it. It's interesting because it begins with that question. What's it like growing up, with your father? And there's, obviously he's a very multifaceted man. I think it's a powerful documentary. Whether you're interested in, if you're interested in film in general, filmmaking in general, it's a must watch. If you're interested in Oliver Stone as a person and his directing approach, and as also his philosophy, his psychology, it's an important documentary to grasp him. So I always recommend people watch that. So yeah, he's a multifaceted person. We grew up at some level on film sets, acting in movies, being around the production process. I mean, this is what people talk about Hollywood. It just annoys me because people don't seem to have any grasp of what Hollywood is when they say that. It's kind of like saying it would be like how do you say it would be like talking about Washington based on the State of the Union address and the few like public addresses that they see every year. Like, oh, that's what Washington looks like. It's like, no, it's Hollywood is work. Like, people work. They don't just like, this is not the Kim Kardashian life where you just get paid to be famous. That's not, yeah, at the very tip top, you can probably have that. But even the great, even the stars who are actors, whether it's the Tom Cruises, the Julia Roberts, like they work hard. Like
Mm-hmm.
these people work long hours, when they're working on a set or whatnot. Like they're working hard, long hours, they're putting a lot of energy into these things. And you show up for a red carpet, people think that's what it is.
Right.
And like, they hear about parties and they're like, oh, that's what it is. Well, you know, is that what your life is like? I mean, who doesn't go to parties on the weekends? I know plenty of people that go to bars and, clubs on weekends. They don't have to be part of Hollywood to go party. So it's just, to me, it's like, it's this entourage fascination with the end result and not with
Hmm.
the actual work that goes into it. And so that's what I grew up with. I'm sure, yes, my dad partied, and yes, he has his, he's had his excesses, but you can read in his book. His book he's got out now called Chasing the Light, which is his autobiography up to 40.
Hmm.
And it's a mixture of many things, but you'll learn a lot about what goes on to making a film. It's complicated, and you'll see
Right.
in his story that it's more failure than success. Thankfully, the success is was epic. He won Oscars. He had some of the top highest accolades you can get in Hollywood. But you see from his book, it's struggle, it's rejection, it's painful, it's losing, it's
Right.
failing. That's a big part of it. And what people just don't seem to understand when they talk about this in a very superficial way, it's not that Hollywood is superficial, it's the human understanding of things is superficial. Unless you actually go beneath the surface and are willing to listen and learn, then all you get is the one-dimensional perspective that's presented by media. And the media, this is my big grief these days, my grievance these days is with the media, because the media is just so manipulative. It's such a
Oh yeah.
lie. They create these articles and this nonsense. They focus your attention on like this microscope on a germ, on a virus,
Right.
symbolically, right? They put the microscope on it and they turn it into the biggest thing in the world.
Right.
And that's literally what the media has done to our human brains for the last 50 years. People got to wake up and start to realize that it's not true,
Right.
and things are not what they seem. And it's a lot more at work and a lot more behind the scenes and a lot more elements that are kind of, how do you say, countervailing, and a lot more depth to people than it appears from the media perspective, or there's a lot more to a story than the media tells you. There's so much that it just bothers me how the media has a tyranny over the human mind.
Right. And you mentioned that how, a lot of it's propaganda. I firmly believe that. Um, Given some of my history, that, I propaganda people seem to think only comes from one direction, and it comes from all directions. But now, since you decide to take a deeper approach to things and go against the grain, and, you know, you're not afraid to speak your mind, do you get a lot of backlash from that? Do you find, or do
I,
you not really pay attention if you do?
I don't know. I don't think I'm of interest to the mainstream in that sense. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the backlash is just, whatever, some idiot on Facebook or social media or Twitter or something. But
Right.
it doesn't really bother me. It's not like I'm not
Right.
exactly of interest to the mainstream media, that's for sure.
Totally understandable. Um, somebody had one question about first, how was spending time with Jesse? Um, Jesse the body. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
Ventura.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jesse
Uh,
Ventura. Yeah, I like Jesse. I mean, it's not like we didn't spend that much time, but I say he's like John Wayne. He's got that sort of straight shooter quality
mhm.
to him, and he's probably taller than Wayne. I think Wayne was pretty tall, but Jesse's like 6'4", 6'5" or something.
Oh
Tyrell,
wow.
his son, is like about the same, and this very big statues of men. But yeah, Jesse was great. He was always receptive and warm with me, and but it was also like a professional environment. We didn't really hang out much beyond uh, the work, which was, in that case, it was doing a TV series where we're taking information and boiling it down to a presentable format for TV, right? So you get these complicated issues, and that's the problem with you know shows like that, conspiracy theory, even Ancient Aliens, right? It's like all these things
Yep.
where you boil these complex stories and complex feelings, and how do you say, elaborate plots, and it tries to like boil it down to talking points for the mainstream audience. It's hard. It's very difficult to convey the truth in that context, but you can give people hopefully a little taste of different possibilities.
Right. Then they also had another question. In your time going to haunted places, did you ever find where you needed to go to actually native medicine men for help other than the ones meaning like New Agers, if
Native
that makes
medicine man.
sense.
Um, yeah, and I mean, I honestly, we, I would, I never sought help from necessarily native medicine men. I've been around certain shamans
Mm-hmm.
um, in my life, but I don't know. I've drawn upon healers from different backgrounds, and at the same time, there's no like one path of healing or shamanic work or Reiki that I can recommend. I think it's just a question of what work, who you connect with,
Right.
what resonates for you, who helps you, right?
Cool. Very interesting. Lost Sue actually is the one that asked that. He's on my channel a lot and is actually Native American, so or indigenous. I don't know ever know critical yeah, the politically correct terminology for
Native.
anything usually, but
You could say both. Native American is still politically correct. Yeah.
right. Okay. Um, let's see. How did you how did you go from obviously you said you wanted to, kind of delve deeper into um like the human understanding and all of that, and that's kind of where interviews came from. Um Now, has your interest always been in what could be deeper? What is behind, like, what makes us move, whether that's like makes us tick, whether that's spirituality, whether it's psychology, um, if there's something more than,
Yeah.
what meets the eye.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of my primordial interests were magic, certain, like a sense of magic, awe, like fantasy, right? How this, how, what do you say? How our psychology works
Mm-hmm.
as humans, and then from there, philosophy was interesting to me as a kid. The question of power was really interesting to me. Like, what is power? I was always curious because psychology plays a role, but at the same time, beliefs in psychology plays a role. But then there's physical power. Might is right. If I have a gun,
Mm-hmm.
aimed at you, obviously, then I have physical power over you, right? And then there's spiritual power, which is really what draws us to ideals and to spirituality, not religious power, not just dogma.
Right.
Someone having power over you because you know I can condemn you to hell. I can tell you that you can, how do you say, if you're a Catholic, you got to come in here and pay the penance, otherwise you're damned to hell. Or
Right.
you name, every religion obviously has that kind of control, but spirituality I found the most powerful because that's the power of surrender. And I
Mm.
said, wow, that's the most powerful thing, because everything else in this world passes. This world is temporary, and if you have power in this realm and you believe in that power that you have, whether it's gold or arms or again, dogma and beliefs, all that stuff is temporary and it's passing and it's fear-based.
Right.
But love, that power is the most transcendent, and that's the power of surrender and trust and faith, and that's the power that I found to be the most important in life.
That is very interesting. Have you found that you have learned, or what have you learned, would you say, like, since starting on this journey? Obviously, what have you learned? Well, that's a broad brush and there's a million different things for that. But what would you say would probably be like one of the most significant things that you've learned, say, even just since you started doing like interviews? I'll throw that out there to kind of narrow it down. Like, because you've had several different people from all different walks of life that you've interviewed for that. Would you say there's like, I don't know, like one thing that you either are consistently learning, or one thing that, or something that like you've learned just since doing that that's kind of widen your horizons?
What I'm consistently learning and getting validation on is how this universe is reflective of our own consciousness.
Mm,
It's so fascinating, endlessly fascinating to me, like how wherever we think we have the answer or the solution, like the universe gives us a twist or
Hmm.
some kind of negation on that, and then at the same time, like, you, how do you say, you have to be able to hold both truths in your head at the same time, and ultimately recognize that there is no truth in the illusory world that's passing. There is only the moment. There is only now. And
Hmm.
if you can surrender to that to the moment, which is now, you open yourself to the infinite possibility of this existence and the ability to transform, to actually to embody your truth and your, how do you say, your soul's truth in
Okay.
this life. So it's like an infinite game of consciousness that we're playing as humans, and it's so endlessly fascinating to me how it's like we're constantly morphing in and out of realities, basically things that
Right.
we think are so important and matter one day, and all of a sudden, like, the next day you're like, well, it's actually not that big a deal.
Right.
Right? How
Right.
many times have you felt that? Because it's like we're energetically charging ourselves with these narratives and with these ideas that oftentimes take us out of the immediacy of the moment.
Hmm.
And I think that's really where we have to start to come into our power as humans. Is, again, I say love is the essential power, and love is a present, ever living thing. And so we have to surrender ourselves to this connection of love in the moment, to see what is available, to see what is urgent, to see what matters, to see what we need and what we don't, and what we can surrender and set aside. Because
Right.
oftentimes, too often, we're attached, we're drawn back to stories of the past, we are tied to things that are no longer meaningful, to symbols that no longer need to have power or sway over our minds, to patterns and strategies that are, again, may theoretically work, but in the moment they just, everything bows to the moment.
Right.
So that's really what we have to consistently remind ourselves is presence, presence, presence.
Right. Stay in the moment. I know there's been things in my life where I've, like you said, you wake up the next day and you're like, wait a minute, that really wasn't that big of a deal. Like, why was I freaking out over that? It's not that big of a deal. Um, and then there are other times that I think we get caught up in the moment when we really didn't have to be quite as much, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
we make,
It's the wrong expression. It's actually, when we're caught up in the moment, we're actually, most of the time, we're playing on past, we're playing with the ghosts of the past.
yes,
We're not really in the moment.
that actually
In
makes
the
a
moment,
lot more sense.
yeah, we're playing with the ghosts of the past. In the moment, it's amazing how, when you start to really, like, let the moment wash over you, how many times I find that, like, even like seconds will go by, and something that bothered me like 5 seconds ago, all of a sudden I can't remember. It
Hmm.
just like washes over you, and you're like, oh, something was bothering me. What was that? It's like, it's just, you have, when you really are in this presence,
Right,
you just don't attach as much. It's
right,
like, okay, you know what? In that moment, it was important, but literally, you can allow the moment to wash over you, and next thing you know, you're like, okay, let it go.
right. Now, have you found that that is something you've been able to kind of acquire, being able to do that more effectively, like over the years as you've gotten older? Or is that kind of been something that's kind of been innate in that you've maybe,
It's innate in all of us, but we forgot how to do it because we got enmeshed in this human paradigm of what they called reality and what our adults taught us and they entrained us with in school and in entertainment and media and all that, what we thought was so important. So the more you train yourself to just embody here and now and to be present, you practice that,
right?
it'll go away. You'll let go of a lot of those old beliefs, a lot of those old structures.
Thing. Never really thought of it like I've thought about it sometimes, but not exactly like the way you put it. Like, instead of saying and caught up in the moment, like you said, caught up with the ghosts of the past. That is epic. What has been your most interesting guest that you would say that you've had on interviews? Like you've had a whole bunch of interesting ones, but if there were certain moments that you could pick out, what would that be? Do you think? Not
I
really.
can't really, I can't. I think because it's like, again, it's a reflection of consciousness. It's how my consciousness, even I watch interviews now because they're all recorded. This season's already recorded, and I
Right.
watch how it's like it's the evolution of consciousness from uh, maybe like the beginning shows with people like Daniel Brinkley and John Perkins, um, and like they were a little bit more grand in their analysis, and then getting very heated in some of these middle shows. I got very it was like a lot of anger coming through with people like Nino Rodriguez and uh, who's we're talking about the Great Awakening and
Right.
Q and things like this, young Pharaoh, people like that who we were very charged politically. And then we got into like the pandemic with Nikki Willis, the director of Pandemic. We got into topics that were again like much more charged with the political temperature of the time, the climate.
Right.
And then now we're going into like the sci-fi. With the last episodes, we've been going into more sci-fi stuff. Sci-fi author David Brin and Josh Boone I mentioned, and Brady Silva, who's more into like the esoteric interpretation of religion and history. And I think it's going to get again like more far out as we go to the end of the season because consciousness shifts. Like
Right.
what is interesting today is boring tomorrow. What is interesting today right now, let's say a month ago, like maybe I was like more charged with the political climate of America. So what was interesting to me then is not so interesting to me now because my consciousness is more like complete with the struggle and not really wanting to engage with that struggle. So I'm more interested by science fiction and visions of where we're going to go as a humanity going forth.
Right.
I don't know, like our consciousness is constantly shifting if we allow it. So that's why I say, to me, what is important what may seem important one day will shift by the next if you allow yourself to be open to it.
Right. Most definitely. Um, Now you were talking about like, where we're going with humanity and things like that. And obviously right now there's, you know, aside from just the political craziness, but somebody also had a question as to whether or not you have heard, if you have any knowledge of the things that are still done today to Native peoples in North America and Black people, and have you ever thought of using your voice to help call it out and bring it to an end?
I'm not really clear on what that's referring to though.
Um, I believe what he is referring to, and correct me if I'm not correct here, Lost, but um, I know at least in Canada, and I don't know if you're aware of this because we're right around the same age, but in Canada they did what they were called a native child grab. I believe it was in like the 60s and the 70s. And evidently, some of that still is going on today, but a lot of the indigenous people don't have the same rights as other people. And then I believe he's talking about, yeah, he was talking about the 60s scoop and missing and murdered Native women and girls, is what he was originally talking about with what's still happening today with the Native people of North America. And I believe he's talking about the black people and colored people with the persons of color, I think is the correct terminology of it now, but of what they are doing as far as trying to make sure that they are have equal rights as everybody else. And if you've ever thought about using your voice um, to help bring, you know, injustice to an end, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Sure. Um, I'm moving inside because my computer is about to die,
Okay,
so I need to
you're
charge
good.
it. Okay. Um, so it's interesting. I don't know the situation in Canada as far as you mentioned that they were taking the native kids away um, at some point in Canada. That's actually more a British Empire policy, if I'm correct, because I know in Australia they were doing the same with the Aboriginal kids. There's a great film, Australia, that Baz Luhrmann made with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman about exactly the separation policy. Also, Rabbit Proof Fence was the film. I think it was done about 12 years ago. It was very well done about, again, this policy of separating the native kids here in Australia, where I am now. And again, this is more British Empire tactics to basically divide and separate the native uh, inheritance, the native language, culture, right, from their generation of children, passing on their memory and their their customs, their ways. So that, as far as I know, that wasn't done in America. Obviously, there were other genocides that were committed here, atrocities committed here, but I don't know about a separation policy in America. So it's a different story. I mean, I would like to get some films made that can help to hopefully empower people of, again, you say people of color, different stories I look at, in historical terms that I think are of importance, whether it's to Black people, natives, and then, obviously you can even get into the question of, Latino history and stories to empower Latin, the people of Latin America, all Latin America, not just North America.
Right.
Because these are ultimately, I look at the interesting story as colonial. To me, the empire is the enemy. The empire is the enemy of all people, and so I don't get so much into the identity politics of race, because again, I can empathize with people of race. Obviously, it's not my tradition and my place to necessarily fight their battle. It's I feel like I can empathize as a storyteller. I can want to help tell those stories, or connect to those stories. But again, I think that no matter what our lineage, we do have you could say ancestral wounds that, again, I can't necessarily resonate with what a Black man in America's ancestral wounds look like, but I can say that we all face the empire as our enemy. Doesn't matter what color we are, because the empire is essentially, it's a colonial mentality that has shaped this world that we live in, that has taken us, no matter whether you're Irish, you got your butt kicked by the English,
Right.
whether you're Italians who got their butts kicked, obviously not in the same way in America that, let's say, a Black person would have, but many people, let's say, in the American story, have gotten beaten down. And that's just the American story, not the overall imperial modality that has created a model across the world that is both positive and negative, right? So we see strains of the positive, with, let's say, globalization, connecting people, bringing markets together, all that kind of stuff. But then there's a lot of devastation that has come with it, as we know, whether it's to the environment, to our food supply. It's uprooting of cultures. I mean, there's many things that have gone on as a consequence of the imperial model of the globe for the whole planet, that's affected all of us. And you can't simply say it's all positive, and it's not all negative either. So we have to say, but the empire as a philosophy is based on the idea of an oligarchy, or a select few, whether it be a bloodline, or, as they've shifted over time to a New World Order philosophy, the New World Order is less about the bloodline and more about the idea of incorporating, people of all races, including Barack Obama, right, to serve the agenda, right, which is ultimately a select corporate control, and using the military for expansion of, expansion of control of that empire over different regions of the globe. So the empire is ultimately the enemy of humanism, and I'm a humanist at heart, and I think the model of a republic, and the constitutional republic that is America, is a tremendous model of opportunity for the whole world. I hope that one day we can achieve it, that promise of what America should be, right?
Right.
Of a country, by and for the people. We're not there yet. Obviously, we've got a long way to go. But I think that we have the best model in place to serve that ultimate agenda, much more than any socialist, communist, fascist model could ever propose, or technocratic model of AI, control could ever propose. So yeah, I mean, that's my spiel. At the end of the day, it's yes, there's a lot of stories that need to be told. There's a lot of wounds and pain and trauma that needs to be addressed. I obviously love to help tell the stories and convey those in the power that I can. Um, but I can only do what's in my prerogative as one person within a system of many artists and many storytellers and many thinkers who I think we all are all a lot of us are serving the same end, which is we want to see the ennoblement of humanity, no matter what your race, creed, color.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree. That's cool to hear you say, like, as far as being more like a humanist and whatnot, which I'd kind of already figured that's kind of the area that you know, philosophy wise came from. Um,
Mhm.
but it's cool to hear you say that. Like, if there was like, obviously the world does not get fixed overnight. It Nothing does. A lot of times what I tell people is, we live in a broken world filled with broken people, and
Hmm.
you can only do so much, but that doesn't mean you can't try. Um, I've told people before, if I am able to positively impact somebody's life, even if it's just one person, then I've done it. Then it was worth it, depending on whatever that could be that I'm doing at that time. Um, I mean, but because you never know who that one person will affect later on or whose life that they will affect and for the good. Um, what was Oh, Lost just wanted to let you know that he is a POW of the Kill the Indian Save the Child program there in Canada, which is why he brought it up because he actually was one of the kids that was taken. And he just
Wow.
wants to let you know that it is still happening as well. And women and kids are being murdered and missing, and we are faced with it not being shared the world about the truth of it. Yeah, I honestly hadn't even heard about the 60s child grab until he had mentioned it to me and I looked it up. But
I'd love to know more about what's happening now. Obviously, I mean, obviously the history is important, but I'd love have him reach out and just if there's anything I can read or anything I can do to understand more about what's happening.
yeah, definitely. I can put you two in touch. Definitely. Um, and let's see here. I believe that was all those questions for now. I was gonna ask you something and it completely slipped my mind. No, that was super interesting, what you were talking about, how, you know, I agree with you. The United States isn't there yet politically. Um, and I don't think none of us will ever 100% agree on everything. Um, but I think it's important that we can sit down and have a dialogue with each other, um, regardless of it. If there was one thing that you could say or do, and here I go with these overly broad questions again, um, what would be like one of the biggest, if you had some sort of a mission in your life, what would you what would you say that would be?
My mission?
Yeah,
I can't tell you. People have to just stick around and find out.
right. Well, I appreciate you very much for coming on and spending time with us tonight. And I will definitely, I'll hook you in Lost Up, uh, really good people. And I know he's been trying to get the message out there too about things going on. And I appreciate everything that you're doing with everything. Like I said, it's definitely an inspiration to me. And I know you're an inspiration to other people. So I appreciate it. And hopefully, here in the future, I'd like to have you on again and see where you're at then, if not still in Australia.
All right, sounds
So
good. Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank
Thanks. You have a great
you.
night.
Yeah, you
Bye.
too. Ciao.